Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're actually starting a new series. I know we've been starting a lot of new series, but because we can't travel, I have to come up with good ideas for transit content, and so I hope you guys really enjoy this one because I imagine it's going to be very long running. This series is going to be about things I like or things I'd like to steal from other transit systems and use here at home in Toronto. These are maybe smart operations methods, cool designs, interesting rolling stock, other unique elements of various transit systems around the world that I think should be appreciated more, and a lot of ideas that I think we should bring back and use in North America where our transit isn't necessarily great. Now, of course, the first episode, as you've seen in the title, is going to be on Sydney, Australia. However, I want to cover a lot of other cities which I haven't had much of a chance to talk about on the channel. These are cities like New York, Paris, London, Tokyo, some of the transit greats of the world. And so, let's get into it. So to start off, I want to talk about Sydney's wayfinding. So I'm not really talking about something that's really into the weeds of wayfinding, things like individual sign designs or architecture. All I'm talking about is the kind of wayfinding totems used on the Sydney transportation network and New South Wales more widely. Basically what they do is they have modes, train, light rail, metro, ferry, etc. And of course, each of those modes starts with a unique letter, T, L, M, F. And basically the totem, or the giant kind of signpost for each different mode, just has the letter of that mode. Now, it might seem like a bit of a weird thing to like, but I think this is a really good way of distinguishing the different services within your transit network without kind of over-branding them. Of course, in Sydney, the trains are branded either Sydney Trains or New South Wales Trainlink, but on the whole, the actual mode isn't branded, unlike in Toronto, where we have GO as our regional service, TTC is our local service, but just within Toronto, GRT is the service in Waterloo, and YRT and Viva are the services in York. This system of wayfinding with the totems and the modes, it just makes a ton of sense, and it reduces confusion about what you're kind of getting with different services. This is especially important in Toronto because we have, like, for example, a lot of BRTs, and each of these BRTs is branded differently, so there's not any kind of cohesion where, oh, you see this sign, you know that it's a standard BRT. They're all branded totally differently, and I think this is really valuable. In terms of how the lines are distinguished, they just add a number after the letter of the mode. So, for example, you have T1, T2, T3. I think that's a really good way of kind of organizing your lines in your network, and it's super flexible. So if you want to add a streetcar, you could have an S. But that's the first idea I think Sydney does really well, and so I wanted to bring it up. Next up is swappable seating on trains. One thing that Sydney's double-decker trains have that is kind of iconic, I think, is the seats which basically fold in either direction. It's a very simple feature. The seat back basically is on a pivot, and so it's smart. If you haven't seen it, go look up a YouTube video and watch it. But this kind of design, it's thoughtful. It shows that the designers of the train actually considered what it's like to ride the train. And a lot of people don't like riding trains backwards or sideways. And now, while I do think that sometimes we need to have seating that's backwards or sideways, I think that this idea of accommodating passengers where possible is really intelligent, and so that's another feature I think is really smart. Next up, using the waterways. Sydney is obviously a city that has tons of waterways with various different inlets, etc. But unlike other cities, which we have in Canada, like Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, all of which are on significant bodies of water, Sydney has a ton of ferry services. Now, I don't necessarily think that Toronto or Montreal is going to have a million ferry services tomorrow. But I definitely think there's opportunities for some various ferry services to different locations. The water is a really good medium for transit because there isn't really a speed limit. You can go fast, you can go direct, there's no concern over traffic, you just need to maintain your individual vehicles. There's no kind of hard infrastructure like roads or tracks that you can have issues with. Collisions aren't a huge issue, so ferries can be super reliable. And because of the fact that you don't have infrastructure you need to constantly maintain, ferry services can run 24 hours, and they do in many cities. Next up is the way light rail is used. Now, you guys have heard me talk ad nauseum about how I don't like the way Toronto is using light rail with our current transit expansion plans. But Sydney really nails this, in my opinion. Sydney, as I mentioned, has various modes of transit, and that is how you should approach your transit network. There's not one mode which should be applied broadly. Every mode has a certain niche where it makes most sense. So in Sydney, they have metro services for what will be the high-density core services. There's long intercity and regional train services that go much further out from the core and have a regional train design. There's shorter S-Bahn style train services that operate through the city core and operate relatively frequently. There's the ferries, which operate on the waterways, busways as well, and then there's light rail. And the way that light rail is done in Sydney is smart. It's used for short, local trips that mostly replace pretty short, high-use bus routes. The reason this is smart is because light rail is not fast, so trying to span regions with it doesn't make a ton of sense. What Sydney does is it enhances the existing bus corridor and then provides additional capacity and ride quality through light rail. It should also be noted that Sydney is one of the few cities that uses Alstom's ground-level power supply technology to power its light rail vehicles without the need for overhead wires in some sections of the newest route, which is quite a nice technology. It's not something applicable in Toronto, but I think in places with warm climates, it's a nice technology, and if you can use it, why wouldn't you? I also have to say I prefer the design of Sydney's light rail vehicles to the ones we're using in Toronto, since they have a much higher density of doors and a better internal layout with strap hangers and more places to hold on for passengers. The final point I want to talk about in today's video is future-proofing, and this primarily pertains to the Sydney Metro. Now, while a lot of systems are being built in North America using automated metro technology, and I'm hugely supportive of it, as you guys all know, there's one element of these automated metros like the REM, HART, and Ontario line that I think could be better. I think that the shorter trains being used on REM and Ontario line are probably fine, but what I really do like about Sydney Metro is that they're thinking on a 50-year time span with the amount of room they had left to expand capacity in the future. Sydney Metro tops out currently at a 4-minute headway, which means there's significant room to increase capacity via increasing headways. Literally, the capacity can be more than doubled just by running trains more frequently. And Sydney Metro left room for up to 8-car trains, which is a very long metro train by modern standards. So there's a ton of room in the line to expand capacity for the future. The stations are also absolutely beautiful and they're very spacious, which means again there's lots of room for future capacity. Now I don't know that this is always the right approach to a metro system. The benefit that Sydney has compared to other systems, Ontario Line being one of them, is that a substantial amount of it is using existing train infrastructure or is elevated. This means that building those longer platforms is not necessarily as restrictive as it would be in Toronto, since much of the northern section that's already been constructed and opened uses an existing rail tunnel and stations that have been retrofitted for the Sydney Metro trains, as well as new elevated viaducts. All this being said though, I still think that the idea and the thought of being future-proofed for 50 years, kind of like Toronto used to be with the Yonge Line, is a really smart and forward-thinking idea, and I think it's really commendable what Sydney's doing with the Metro. Anyways, that's my video on my favorite things about Sydney public transit. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I want you to leave a comment down below telling me what city I should talk about next. I have tons of cities I want to talk about, from Paris to Dubai to Delhi, Santiago, Buenos Aires. I have tons of cities I want to talk about the transport networks in, so again, leave the comments down below on what I should talk about next, and I'll see you in the next one.